I just want what Prometheus wanted.
Sounds great, Lex. But you're not a god.
Gods are selfish beings who fly around in little red capes and don't share their power with mankind.
Where did you go?
To Krypton.
But you told me it was destroyed.
5 years. If your father was alive, he never would have let you go. Did you find what you were looking for?
That place was a graveyard. I know all that's left.
What do you know about crystals? This crystal may seem unremarkable, but so is the seed of a redwood tree. It's how our mutual friend in tights made his Arctic getaway spot.
You're building an island?
Not just an island, an entirely new continent. An extinct world, reborn on our own.
Superman Returns was released in the summer of 2006. It had been nearly 20 years since Superman last appeared on our screens in Superman 4. There had been many failed attempts over the years to bring Superman back on the big screen, but the one project that nearly got off the ground was Tim Burton's version in the late 90s called Superman Lives, focusing around the death and the return of Superman. The stories are legendary, producer John Peters getting writer and cult movie favourite Kevin Smith on board, and Mr. Peters came up with many crazy ideas that deviated so far from Superman that it became ridiculous. If you check out all the production designs and outfits, you can clearly see they were going in the wrong direction, and Warner Brothers put a stop to it, thank God. I think it would have been the biggest abomination in cinema history, going from the legendary Christopher Reeve to Nicolas Cage as Superman. Bryan Singer, who had great success with the first two X-Men flicks, had always been a huge fan of the original Richard Donner Superman movie. When the opportunity arose, he submitted a treatment for his version to Warner's, which took place after Superman 2, ignoring the events in Superman 3 and 4. They were impressed and gave him the job, and he jumped ship from working on X-Men 3, which angered 20th Century Fox and the fans. But Superman was more important to Bryan Singer. He was given a huge budget of over $200 million apparently. Some of the costs of using Marlon Brando's footage was to account for the large budget. I think it was close to $50 million to approve it with Brando's estate. By this point, Superman fans were in high spirits, and once the teaser trailer arrived, it felt like we were getting a proper sequel to Richard Donner's classic. I still personally believe it's the best teaser trailer out there. Despite the hype when the movie finally arrived, it failed to grab the audience Warner Brothers were hoping for. But also it was up against a dreadfully dull Pirates of the Caribbean sequel, which stormed the box office and probably affected Superman's success. It managed to recoup back nearly $400 million worldwide, which is extremely good. But they were hoping it would have done better, especially in the USA. Because of Warner's large investment, they didn't make as much money back as they hoped. The director felt that marketing wasn't strong enough, and I think at the time I thought the same. When you have a movie with little action, especially a superhero flick, it's difficult to create exciting trailers. Even though it made less money than the studio wanted, it did fare better than Batman Begins, and was extremely popular on DVD and Blu-ray. When it came to casting, Brandon Routh was obviously chosen because he bears a striking resemblance to Christopher Reeve, and some scenes he looks identical to him. Despite his lack of acting experience, I don't think anyone really had a bad word to say about him. He does his best with what he is given. The dialogue unfortunately lets him down, and there isn't enough time for him on screen to shine as Clark Kent or Superman. Kate Bosworth was the worst casting ever, far too young and did not suit the image of Lois. She wears this awful wig which ends up giving her the biggest forehead ever, and her dialogue makes her extremely unlikable and portrays her as a selfish bitch. Plus there's no chemistry between her and Brandon. Frank Langella, a fine actor and a great choice for Perry, he reminded me of the George Reeves series version of Perry White, but his character was directed in a more relaxed manner than I was used to. Sam Huntington was very likeable as Jimmy Olsen and was great casting. It's a shame we will never see him again play Jimmy. Kevin Spacey was the number one choice for many previous attempts of Superman movies, and Bryan Singer personally got him on board. Kevin is a fantastic actor and great in the film, but he is not given much to work with, and a recycled plot from Superman the movie. Lex is after land again, but the scene I love is when he discovers that Jason may be Superman's son. His performance in that scene is incredible. Parker Posey is just there as a generic Miss Tessmacher character, but as an actress she is so likeable and again does her best with what she is given. To be honest, I think she would have made a great Lois Lane, far better than Kate Bosworth. With the story, it's set 5 years apparently after the events of Superman 2. If you weren't following the prequel comics or the hype surrounding the movie, you wouldn't have a clue that it was set after that sequel. Superman returns to Earth after trying to locate Krypton and finds a world that has changed, and Lois has moved on and has a child. During his absence, Superman's nemesis Lex Luthor was released from prison due to Superman's failure to appear at Lex's trial, and married a rich widow to obtain her fortune upon her death. Lex locates the Fortress of Solitude, learns about the crystal that was left to Kal-El by his father. Lex, still obsessed with land, wants to create a new continental landmass in the North Atlantic. Clark Kent resumes his job at the Daily Planet. He subsequently learns that Lois Lane has won the Pulitzer Prize for her article, Why the World Doesn't Need Superman. Lex uses a tiny fragment from the crystal to use for an experiment that causes a mass power outage on the East Coast. The power loss interferes with the flight test of a space shuttle to be launched into space from its piggyback mounting on an airliner occupied by Lois Lane, who is covering the story. Clark flies into action as Superman and stops the plane from crashing onto a baseball stadium. The world rejoices at Superman's return, but he has difficulty coping with Lois's fiancé Richard White, nephew of Daily Planet editor-in-chief Perry White, and her 5-year-old son Jason. I think 80% of the visual effects are very good. The plane sequence is incredible, and the construction of New Krypton is executed extremely well, but Bryan Singer made some bizarre choices on where he used CGI. You have extreme close-ups of Superman computer generated, and it looks so fake. He could have shot these within camera behind a green screen. It doesn't do the movie any favours. At the time being the most expensive movie ever made, in many areas it doesn't look that spectacular. You have flying shots of Superman whizzing past camera, and you can barely see him. If I was an executive at Warner Brothers, I'd be thinking, where did you spend the money? In the documentary there are loads of behind the scenes footage of Brandon Routh practicing with the wires, and people on the production said there would be loads of in-camera shots of him flying, but there is barely any in the movie. There are possibly 3 in-camera wire shots, and they are badly blocked out and framed. The soundtrack to the film is fantastic. Like all Superman fans, they were all so happy to hear they would be using John Williams' themes again, and Bryan Singer said he wouldn't do the movie if he couldn't even use the Superman March. John Ottman provides probably his best score to date, and orchestrates the original themes throughout the film, and provides some great new material such as the new theme for Lex Luthor, and some incredible action cues, especially for the plane rescue. The score even homages Space Odyssey 2001, at the end where he lifts New Krypton into space. The score is available on a single CD, but there is a bootleg of the original recordings of the complete score floating around online, so definitely check that out. Superman Returns does get some unfair bashing, and it kinda started a couple of years ago. When the film came out it got rave reviews. As an example, Empire magazine awarded it 5 out of 5 stars. Fans loved it and most critics praised it for its tone and what it was trying to do. But I think once everyone saw it maybe a second or third time and digested everything, they began to see its flaws and felt it didn't deliver on what people expected. I still think many people were confused at the time what the film was. Was it a sequel, prequel or a remake? It kind of touches upon all these areas and doesn't feel like its own movie. Being a Superman fan, this is what I like about Returns. The intro sequence and hearing the John Williams music again was fantastic, and it really gets you excited as you travel through space and the credits whoosh past. Movies today don't have epic titles anymore, and it's a huge loss to the feeling of viewing a summer blockbuster. The plane rescue was executed with great care and detail, and it is the standout piece of the movie. Kevin Spacey is a great Lex Luthor and provides a top-notch performance. I find no fault with it. It just had a rehashed idea from Superman the movie, and he spends half his time travelling in a helicopter. All round he was poorly used in this film. The production design beautifully updates John Barry's original work from Superman the movie, but the Daily Planet didn't leave me that impressed. I love Art Deco, but it just seemed to lack any character and wish they stayed with a more realistic design like in the first movie. The confrontation between Lex and Superman is great to see, and is photographed to a high standard, and is the best looking scene in the movie considering the rest of the cinematography is bad, excluding the Smallville scene. Superman getting hurt and stabbed is played out well, and is generally upsetting. There are some iconic imagery and great compositions in the film, when Superman catches the Daily Planet globe and rests it on a car, and when he recharges his energy in front of the sun, and the score really delivers during that moment. It has that Walt Disney style choir music to it that reminds me of the golden age of cinema. Superman Returns is by no means an awful film, and anyone who says it is being ridiculous. It's a confidently made feature, but it's quite frankly too long in areas. Many scenes feel padded out, and the plot feels like it's a 90-minute movie stretched over 2 hours. To sum it up in one word, it's lackluster. I appreciate the style of the movie's editing, it's done in a very classical way, doesn't cut every 2 seconds like modern action flicks, but that's also its downfall. The long edits help drive the length of the movie. It lacks action, which everyone highlights, and it is a big problem. The plane sequence is the only real exciting scene. Unfortunately, on the whole, it's a bit dull in areas and not very exciting even on a visual level. The photography is way too dark, it's very muddy and is brown in areas. The blues look icy cold. I saw this on IMAX and I remember the end scene where he flies over the city just before the end of the movie, and I could barely see him on screen. So it's not the DVD and Blu-ray releases that have been issued with rubbish transfers, even though they are very weak. The theatrical prints looked rubbish too. If you go back and view the trailers and especially the teaser for the movie, it has a completely different colour design. I think in post they have fiddled with the image. Quite frankly, they made a bad decision and made it look worse. Heck, even check the deleted scenes and the return to Krypton sequence. The visual colour palette looks way better. The whole movie definitely needs to be recolour timed. There's no real sense of fun in Superman Returns. It's very gloomy and downbeat and doesn't lift your spirits. Even Superman 3 does a better job than that. Just watch Reeve change to Superman, it will put a big smile on anyone's face. I appreciate what Bryan Singer was trying to do. I don't think the film failed because it was in the Richard Donner universe, it just didn't offer anything new. The only new ideas they introduced was Superman having a child, which was a very ballsy idea, but it makes things difficult for the prospect of a sequel, and makes Superman to be a complete arsehole. Just disappears from Earth without saying goodbye to Lois, and the belief he may have fathered a child. It's very uncharacteristic of Superman. Bryan Singer has come forth with a number of excuses as to why it failed. He once cited saying it was aimed at the Devil Wears Prada crowd. I'm sorry, what? This is a Superman film, you do know that, Mr. Singer. You should be aiming this generally at teenage lads who are going to be there when it's released. He even blamed Brandon Routh for its failure, which is incredibly harsh. Brandon was given very bland dialogue and not much to do on screen. The suit was a disaster in my opinion from the start. Awful anorak cape, mute colour designs and overly designed boots, which they have way too many close-ups of. But I think what got fans upset, and me as well, was that we waited nearly 20 years for a new film, and what we got was a very depressing return of Superman, and having him not doing much on screen as I highlighted earlier. It's sad it didn't meet its expectations on the whole really. It needed more rewrites and tightening up in a number of areas, but it's an interesting production because it's an example of a studio letting a Superman fan go too far with his creative freedom. They should have thought more carefully if it was the right approach. People may look upon this movie with more affection over the years. People's taste changes all the time and their perception of what a superhero movie should be about. But for me, it failed to really make me believe that Superman had returned.
Even though you've been raised as a human being, you are not one of them. They can be a great people color if they wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. For this reason, above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son.